Hello, everybody. I'm Amy Eisman. I'm the director of the journalism division here at American University, and I want to welcome you here today for this event. Since no one wants to stand in the way of pairing great journalism ideas with people and funders who are eager to support them, I'm going to be brief. The information session today is brought to you by AU's journalism program and by the Investigative Reporting Workshop, which is the nonprofit newsroom here on campus, specifically Lynn Perry, who invited the Spotlight team here today. She's going to introduce them in a minute. For students and for other journalists, this is a golden opportunity to apply your hard-earned skills to the real world of deep and important project reporting in the metropolitan area. For everyone else, it's a chance to be in awe of two giants in Washington journalism who insist and are just putting money behind it, that local journalism is not just the past, but the future. Lynn, I turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I want to tell you just a bit about IRW, the Investigative Reporting Workshop, and then I'll introduce our two panelists today. At IRW, we publish news and investigations about a variety of topics. Healthcare, the environment, police shootings, and immigration, particularly in the last year, have been our focus. I'm also excited to tell you that tonight PBS Frontline will be rebroadcasting our co-production of Plastic Wars, a 2020 program in which we looked at how the plastics industry has publicly promoted recycling, even while knowing almost from the beginning that recycling was never really economically viable. And next Tuesday, May 18th, PBS Frontline will air The Healthcare Divide, which is also a co-production of Frontline, IRW, and NPR. This 1-hour program is going to look at the disparities between hospitals and how many of the richest hospitals have really grown in wealth during the pandemic, and many of those who serve the needy and the less economically advantaged have done worse during the pandemic. Both Plastic Wars and The Healthcare Divide will be available on Frontline, on air, and online, also on YouTube and our site. So end of the commercial. That's my commercial for IRW, but we're thrilled to be hosting today's event with the School of Communication, which is to talk to you a little bit about what Spotlight DC does, where their whole mission is to raise funds, put them in the hand of journalists, and provide guidance and promote their work. With us today is Margaret Peggy Engel, who directs the Alicia Patterson Journalism Foundation. She's a former managing editor of the Newseum. She was a reporter for the Washington Post, Des Moines Register, and Lorraine Journal, and she was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard. Peggy serves on the advisory board of the Fund for Investigative Journalism, and she chairs the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards Board. Harry Jaffe will be joining her. Harry has been writing columns and reporting on crime, politics, business, and sports in the Washington region for 34 years. He began covering local matters with Regardes magazine in 1986. From 1990 to 2016, he was national editor and a features writer at the Washingtonian magazine. He's author or co-author of 7 books, including Why Bernie Sanders Matters, and one about Washington, D.C. called Dream City, Race, Power, and the Decline of Washington, D.C. with journalist Tom Sherwood. His work has appeared locally in the Post, D.C. Examiner, and on NBCWashington.com. So we're really excited to have these two esteemed people with us, and they're going to talk to you a little bit about what they do, what they're looking for, and how to make your mark. So Margaret and Harry, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to thank American University and IRW for this opportunity. Lynn, you've been terrific in engaging with us and helping to make this happen. Matt, thank you so much for just organizing it, and Amy for welcoming us. We have a hopefully an interesting presentation, including a video and the nuts and bolts of how to work with Spotlight DC. But before we get to the video, I wanted to just turn it over to Peggy to talk for a welcome as well.
Thank you. It's so essential that we have eyes and boots on the ground in local areas where we all pay taxes and are curious about what's happening. Nothing creates a cold chill with journalists than to think about all the boards and commissions and activities that are going on and no one is covering it. And we know news is being committed. So there is a huge interest now, particularly with the world focus of the Washington Post these days, that there's a void and we really need to fill it. And we've got a lot of creative and industrious journalists here in Washington, and we're hoping we can marry our financial support with your interest and get more local reporting to the eyes that need to see it.
Agreed. So the video.
Hi, I'm Kojo Namdi. Spotlight DC was started because there was a dire need for more investigative local journalism. The COVID-19 pandemic has made that need now even more crucial. And Spotlight DC reporters are hard at work even as I speak, uncovering stories that are crucial to this city and this region. Continued support, continued funding will allow Spotlight DC to continue to do that. The major change for journalism in Washington is its disappearance. Something has to be created to take their place. Spotlight is one of those creations, and in my view, a crucial creation.
DC, unlike other parts of the country, is government, federal, state, and local. It is our industry.
In Washington, we have thousands of reporters, but most are concentrated on the national scene.
This project is focused on the Washington area, what people today call the DMV.
Those of us who have been at this for some time in the city realize this is a different era. Now it's quick hits, meeting deadlines, moving on to the next story. No in-depth study of the issues that really matter to people.
Investigative reporting is expensive. It's time-consuming. It takes a lot of resources that news organizations don't have today.
We need Spotlight DC because we have no organization like Spotlight DC.
We do have an agenda. It's not a political agenda, nor is it an ideological agenda. It's an informational agenda.
If you don't have journalism working to examine our civic life, then you're just operating blind.
Making it possible for people to do this kind of journalism in a place like this is critical. I can't think of anything more important.
People in this era need to be able to rely on good, sound information. And you can only get that by reporting.
And it's our obligation to do that, to shine this light on situations so the public will know. It's their money. They ought to know how that money is being spent or misspent.
Reporters that they used to be able to rely on are disappearing. Something has to be created to take their place. Hi, I'm Kojo Namdi.
So to expand on that just a little bit, we had some news this morning out of the Washington Post. The Washington Post appointed a new executive editor to take over from Marty Barron, and her name is Sally Busby. She's immensely qualified. She comes from the Associated Press. But from my perspective, since I am focused on local news, what she brings to the Washington Post is what the Washington Post needs to complete its and be successful at its business model, which is international reporting, national reporting, and digital reporting. And what I see missing there is a leader of the Washington Post that is interested, focused on, and understands the total necessity for local news coverage. And I don't know whether you agree with me entirely, Peggy, but it certainly seems to me that the Washington Post has withdrawn from covering local news, and so have most of the TV stations, and it makes what we do that much more important.
I don't think withdrawn totally, but their financial model is so tied to digital subscriptions now, and that translates to national and international reporting. So I'm seeing it more as an opportunity for more journalism foundations to focus on the local. But yes, I miss the fact that every county in the DMV doesn't even have their basic county government meetings covered anymore. Not that you're going to find sterling information at all meetings, but there are many engines of government that are completely unexamined. So there's a huge task ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, the Post is starting bureaus all over the world, but I don't think they have one in Fairfax or Prince George's County any longer. So that kind of explains the why of Spotlight DC. You know, I've spent my career focusing on local news, and so when Colby King and I saw that there was a need for local news coverage, but especially long form, deeply written, deeply reported stories. That's why we formed Washington, D.C. Our basic mission is very simple. We are raising charitable funds. We're a 501c3 organization. We invite proposals. We have an advisory board of journalists who are largely experienced editors or reporters in investigative reporting. They evaluate the proposals and send it on to our board of directors for funding. And with that model, we have funded 10 stories, 10 projects, and among them, a terrific story on investigating fraud in the DC eviction system, which has done very well and was a finalist in the IRE Awards. We moved into podcasting. We funded Paul Wagner's terrific podcast on an unsolved murder in Prince George's County of a nurse many years ago, which has done very, very well on Apple and WTOP. And you know, we're eagerly looking for journalists and projects that can come to us with important investigative or explanatory journalism that we can fund. We have broadened our lens from purely funding and investigative journalism, which is just hard to pull off, to explanatory journalism as it's defined by the Pulitzer Committee. So stories that might not necessarily wind up with somebody, getting fired or being jailed, which investigative stories can do, but stories that deeply look into public interest journalism and point out problems. And that's what we're looking for. Public interest, important stories with a lot of impact. We're also very, very willing to work with applicants on getting the proposals organized for success.
I wanted to add to that for all the students who are part of this endeavor today. Don't be intimidated. I know that many of you have major projects that you do, particularly in your junior and senior year. And if you're working on a local topic, a local agency that you're examining, don't think that simply because most of the people on the board have been in the business for a couple decades doesn't mean you should not submit and query us about getting financial help to either finish your project or polish it, because that's what the advisory board is here to do, is to help you get it into a terrific publishable state. And that's good for journalism. It's good for your career aspirations. And so don't be intimidated by the fact that this may be your first real jump into serious, in-depth local journalism.
Exactly. And I wanted to add that Spotlight DC would be a great bridge from the work you're doing in school to getting published. We have media partnerships with the Washington City paper, with WAMU and DCist, WTOP, Greater Washington, DC Line, with almost every single local publication, plus the Washington Post. Washington Post is not an official media partner, but I've been working with Jeff Lean, the investigative editor at the Post, to bring some stories to them. So, what we see ourselves when it comes to working with students as exactly what Peggy said. If you have a project that is you've been started in class, it's not finished, you could take it to the next level, bring it to us. You might very well meet with success. And people journalists in Washington tend to look at the national scene and the international scene. There's so much that's unexamined here in DC. I mean, it's the DC government has a $17 billion budget. And I would offer to say that not very many people know where that money is spent and how that money is spent. Oversight by the DC Council, not necessarily stellar. If you go to Virginia, Fairfax is one of the wealthiest counties in the country. I don't think that the politics and the spending in Fairfax, Virginia is examined at all in depth. So those are the kinds of, Prince George's County is again, busting out at the seams. Journalism, a spotlight on how things are working well or not so well doesn't really exist over there.
Harry, why don't you tick off what you're specifically looking for when you get a proposal across the desk?
Exactly. Here's the basic criteria, and I want to thank Matt for putting this together for us. I think first we really have to, we're really focused on the region. And I'm not saying that a regional story might not have national or international impact, but the characters, the setting, the essential elements of the story have to be located based on news here in the district or the Virginia, Maryland suburbs. And then the short summary should not at all be strange to folks in the journalism world. The basics, who the project is about, who are the characters, what will it describe, the setting, where will it take place, the impact, hugely important. What we're looking for are stories that are worth our investment, but that will affect some change and will have some impact and improve people's lives. The proposal must also give us a sense of how the journalist is going to pull it off. What will be the essential reporting parts? What will be the documents? Who will be the sources? And then the always troublesome, when are you going to deliver? The deadline aspect of it. Number three, as much as possible, and I know that one of the difficulties in pitching a story, proposing a story, is how much do you have to show and how much reporting do you have to have done before it comes through. As much of the reporting as possible. The budget, helpful. Bio, to let us know, who you are, whether you can pull this off. And then once the project comes in, one of the things that I wanted to stress, especially to journalism students, is that we are eager and willing to work with journalists who propose stories and propose projects. I'm the first line of entry. I'm happy to work with folks to get the project in better shape before it goes to the advisory board. But that's basically it. What's it about? What's the impact it's going to have? How are you going to do it? And how you're going to change the world with it. But I want to give you one example that got us a little bit too excited, but it kind of hit the mark very high. Josh Kaplan, who graduated from the University of Chicago with a math degree, but got interested in journalism, came to us with a data-driven story about fraud in the DC eviction system. He discovered that the essential part of the whole eviction system, which is alerting tenants that they are about to be evicted or in the eviction process, they weren't being alerted. The essential subpoena aspect of letting people know that there was a court action was not happening because the process servers were not delivering the information to tenants who were in jeopardy. It took us a year to get that story into publishable shape. It went to DCist, where it was published on a Monday. On a Tuesday, the District of Columbia Council changed the law to close the loophole. So that was a story that we labored on with Josh, with an editor, for nearly a year. But when it hit, it landed with tremendous impact. That's the high point of what we're trying to pull off, but it's a good example of what we can do together. Any questions from there's Josh Kaplan's story, which did extremely well for renters, for tenants. It really changed the game.
Harry, you might explain a little bit about the money, how much people can expect to obtain.
The money. We are prepared to fund projects from a floor of $2,000 to as much as $10,000 for the right project. We are in the luxurious position right now of actually having funds to apply to projects to help bring them off. And we have projects coming in that are extremely exciting. There's one that has to do with an environmental justice project in Ward 7 and Wards 8 in DC. We're working with a producer with Maryland Public Television on a story about sexual predation in the Maryland in the counties surrounding DC. So we have projects coming in that we're very excited about, but I'd love to hear from any questions about anything that I've left out, or any explanation that we can go forward on.
Harry, you have one question in the chat. Someone is asking, are you willing to work with newly formed small media organizations? And then we'll go to John Aaron. I see your hand up.
Yes, when it comes, so if small media organizations means, do you mean that the projects would be coming from the small media organizations or would be published by? But I would say yes to both. We're interested, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peggy, but we're interested in just solid quality projects. And when the projects come in, I don't think that we are in a position to judge the source. We're more interested in what is it and can you pull it off?
Yes, and I think the real answer is it doesn't have to be one individual. Many of the projects come in as group efforts, partnerships, a reporter, photographer, videographer, etc. So probably most of you know that in the last decade, because of the diminution of legacy media, about 140 nonprofit journalism groups have sprung up around the country to try to fill this void. And so, yes, if particularly some of these small organizations find that their stories bring them into the DMV, that would be terrific. But also a note to the students who are listening, when you have to pick topics for your reporting classes, stray outside of AU, which is probably, most college campuses probably are the best covered entities in America today because there's so many student journalists examining things. But look to us with an eye to the future and pick a topic that may be totally unfamiliar to you, but outside of an academic setting into the real world of Prince George's, Montgomery County, Fairfax, DC. Look at a story there and do it for your class, and then think about expanding it with us.
John, I see you had a hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. I have two questions. First of all, the first requirement is that it be something within DC. Must it be spending by the DC government? Because I've been working on an issue
Well, I'll just jump in real quick to tell you that it can be about the region. They're talking
Okay.
about the metro region. It doesn't have to be specific to
Okay.
only the district.
Well, let me just expand on this if I may. The federal government has a unique benefit for veterans in DC that is not part of the VA. It's had financial issues for years. So it's federal government spending within the district, although the veterans obviously can come from all over the nation. Might that be suitable, in the broadest sense?
I would say absolutely, propose the story.
Okay.
And to answer your question specifically, no, this is not about government spending. Public safety, public health,
Okay.
public transportation, across the board, and it doesn't have to be about the government. It can
Okay.
be a sports team. It can be, we have a very broad sense of what we would fund. And one thing I would suggest to students, playing off of what Peggy was saying, is that a story that I did years ago for Washingtonian Magazine is the toxic waste dump in Spring Valley, which I think is still an open pit, right, bordering on AU campus. I'd love to know what's happening there. It's still, I think it's cost the federal government $300 million, and I'm not sure they're done yet. They're still looking for toxic waste from World War I chemical labs based at what is now American University.
Okay. Thank
Right.
you. And then the second, if I may, I heard the word videographer. I've just created a sort of video op-ed on gun control, saying that closing the gun show loophole is both necessary and constitutional. Is that the sort of issue that, if it were tied to gun violence within the district or the region, that might be appealing, either written or as a video documentary style report?
I would say absolutely yes to the video, but we're trying to fund hard news, investigative, and explanatory journalism as
Okay.
opposed to opinion journalism.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
the media, video, podcast, radio is the media is we're agnostic about that and happy across platforms, but the subject matter has to be purely journalistic as opposed to opinion. Correct?
Yes. Thank you.
Let me just add another note for the students. If you're sort of at sea because you haven't lived in any of these jurisdictions and you're a college student, go to news stories from the Post or Washingtonian from 15 to 20 years ago and do an update, because as you know, journalism has problems ever doing look behind stories, which sometimes are the best ones out there, because these problems don't vanish once they're written about, obviously. And the aftermath and the new directions and what's happening now and the neglect that is occurring, even though items have been exposed, is just a bountiful basket for you to choose from. I'm thinking about, a story I think I did 30 years ago for the Post about the lead water lines in the district, particularly very close to AU around Sherrier Place in the Palisades. All those houses have lead problems and the kids have had higher lead levels. That was 30 years ago. It's now getting rid of lead service lines is sort of back in the nation's view because it's become an issue as a part of President Biden's idea of improving the infrastructure. But there are lead service lines all over this region. And it would be really interesting to see if the lead problems are still high in areas and the kids are being affected.
We have time for a few more questions. So please either put them in the chat or raise your hand, or just, feel free to jump in. We're welcoming all questions.
So we don't see ourselves as having a newsroom or assigning stories. However, and this shouldn't be all about what Peggy and Harry Jaffe have written, but looking at the toxic waste dump right next to AU in Spring Valley, I think I would certainly entertain an investigative look at that particular situation. And I'd love to entertain proposals about the university. That would work for me too, for us as well. So, and getting back to what John asked, I want to stress that our lens is pretty wide open when it comes to the kinds of stories, as long as they are based in the DMV and have an explanatory or an investigative long form reach and depth. Please propose. One of the things that Chuck Lewis mentioned to me early on, Chuck being head of the investigative workshop, correct?
That's right.
Is that there are often projects that students will begin during the course of the year and for credit, but are not entirely done when classes are over. He said that could be a fertile place for funding and for completion and for publication. And Peggy, I think will agree with me here that the currency in our business, because it is a business, is clips. If students at American University saw Spotlight DC as a way to take a school project to be published and get a byline, that would be a win-win. So I would encourage that.
Thanks. We have a question from Daniel Z.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Thank you for making the time to be here today. My question is just about editorial guidance and basically what levels of support and guidance you all may be giving throughout, say, the reporting process, or when it kind of gets downtime to write or to edit, or wherever that may be. Are you all offering or providing some of that guidance, or is it more just helping to get things done on time and to potential publication, and they will be offering editorial guidance? Great question.
I have two answers for you. First is that if we're not publishers, we're funders. If a project that we fund goes to Washington City Paper or DCist or the Washington Post, they will have editors that will work with the journalists. Having said that, in the case of Josh Kaplan's story on evictions in DC and the fraud in the eviction system, we had the services of a terrific investigative editor, and he worked very closely with Josh to hone the reporting, to work on the writing and the presentation. And so I have two answers for you. One is that we're not in the business of editing, but if necessary, we will pitch in. We at the same time, if we fund a story, we are happy to work with editors at the publications where the stories will be published, but the editors at the publications, they take precedence.
Okay, we have two more questions in the chat. Chris Kane asks, returning to the Spring Valley chemical munitions, can you elaborate on what would separate the kind of story you would fund versus a more standard story that wouldn't rise to that level?
Let me just jump in first, Harry, only because I want to say one of our Alicia Patterson fellows, Theo Emery, did a very recent book on chemical weapons, and about a third of the book is devoted to the area in Spring Valley. And that doesn't knock out any project at all. I'm just telling you that because you'll want to catch up with that book if you go down that road.
To answer Chris Kane's question, Yes, I mean, it has to be beyond a daily news story, which would say they're still digging. I think that there are unanswered questions, despite Theo's work, or in conjunction with Theo's work. There are groundwater issues. Um, there are health issues that have not been entirely explored, and so I think that I can't describe exactly what an explanatory journalism piece would be, because it would be more explanatory than investigative. I know that these are journalistic terms that may not occur to us with easy answers, but I do think that it's explanatory journalism. The people who are involved now, there are ongoing monthly meetings between the Army Corps of Engineers and residents who are on a particular board guiding this. And one of the questions I have is, why are they still digging? I mean, how deep is the toxic waste? They still have alarm systems and tents erected right down the hill from American University. And there's all these questions about whether the soccer field is contaminated. So still think there are unanswered questions, Chris, that could we would consider funding for long form journalism.
And then we have a question from Candace. Should we already have an agreement to publish with one of the media partners before we pitch to Spotlight, or will you help us connect with editors once the project is approved?
Another excellent question, and I have an answer, actually. We're very much modeled after the Fund for Investigative Journalism, which is a national and international funder of investigative reporting. And the FIJ requires a commitment letter. You have to come with a proposal and a commitment to publish. We're not in that position. So a kind of a two-pronged answer. We're thrilled if there's a publisher, but if there's no publisher, we will indeed work with the applicant to find a publisher in one of our media partners. So we are a lot more flexible than the Fund for Investigative Journalism, and happy actually to work to find homes for great reporting.
Either one of you, Peggy or Harry, can you explain, are deadlines ongoing, or do you only take proposals at a certain time of year? And then Dan, I see your hand up, so we'll go to you next.
We're open. We have rolling deadlines.
Okay.
One of the things that you have to consider is that we're a startup organization. We've been successful, and we want to continue to be successful, but we are not inundated with proposals. FIJ, the Alicia Patterson Foundation, there's a surfeit of proposals, but because we're very local and we're somewhat new, we have open arms. Bring your proposals, please.
Great. Dan, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. In terms of student journalists, is there interest not just in stories for like journalism classes, but work that student journalists do for their school newspaper? Absolutely. I mean, I've been in touch with the editors of the Eagle, the past editor, and I think Sarah is the new editor, if I'm not mistaken. Claire. I consider the school newspaper to be a very important publication. It's really the kind of story. If it fits into the explanatory, investigative, deeply reported mold and has great impact, I would very much support publication in the Eagle.
Paul, I see your hand up.
Hi. I wanted to jump in just quick because my battery's about to die here. There's a couple of stories I wanted to offer to journalists, student perhaps, that are not getting a hard look, that I think are ripe for a great story. One of them is the DC Crime Lab. It has lost its accreditation. It cost $200 million to build. I did multiple stories over the years to point out that the city didn't have a crime lab, and now it's just a big block of nothing down there. It's a disaster. and it's not getting the attention I think it deserves. So it's a great story. If a journalist at American U wants to jump into that, I'd be happy to steer them and show them where to go and what to look at. But it affects the Public Defender Service, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the DC Attorney General's office. It's a mess. So that's one idea. The other one, this person pitched this story to me, and I can't do it. It's just I don't have the platform for it. But is a district getting the district to build out a statewide longitudinal data system on students, and basically students that get lost in the system. And this person who reached out to me says that $35 million has already been spent in the district. The Office of the State Supreme Court, State Superintendent of Education has data, has spreadsheets, has apps and publisher charts, but does not have statewide data on all the students that are in the city. And that's another story that you could jump into. And then lastly, I'll just say, because I think my battery's about to die, is that Harry really got after me to apply for one of these grants. I had been working on a story for about 10 months without any pay, and they accepted my proposal, and it turned out fantastic. And when I started the story out, I didn't even know where it was really going to take me. It was a story about an unsolved murder, but really what it turned out to be is a story about genealogy and how police are using genealogy to solve homicides. It's a fascinating part of what cops are doing these days, and how they're going into databases, private databases, to find people. And so I'm certainly hoping that my story ends with a solve, that the cops solve this case. And I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast Your Own Backyard, but there was a guy that did a podcast out in California that finally was solved because he paid attention to it and laid out this amazing story about a student that was kidnapped from a college campus and had gone unsolved for years. So I just wanted to add that. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at paul.wagner@casejackets.com. And although I'm working part-time right now for NBC and I'm doing podcasts with WTOP, I'm more than happy to help anybody that might need some direction.
That's really generous. Thank you so much, Paul. It's really wonderful to hear you offer those ideas and that support. It's 12:45, and I think we're kind of winding down. If there's a last question, we're happy to take it, or if someone wants to put something in the chat. In the meantime, we have some good follow-up contact information here for you, where to send your proposals, how to get in touch with Harry. If you have questions about the journalism division and how we work and our programs, please feel free to check us out online. And if you have a specific question about the investigative reporting workshop and how we work or could work with you or Spotlight DC, feel free to reach out to info@irworkshop.org. Amy, I think I'll turn it over to you. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. I'll give it another second or two, but maybe you can close us out.
Okay. Well, I want to, of course, thank Lynn and Peggy and Harry for really so informative, wonderful session. It's rare that people are standing in front of you and saying, we have money to help you investigate important issues, and that's what happened today. I heard 3 takeaways from what they talked about. They broadened their lens to include explanatory journalism and public interest journalism, which I think is fantastic, particularly for students as we're thinking about these topics. The second, as I heard, that they're very open to student work. They're going to help you. Paul had some terrific ideas for topics in off campus. And the third is that a reminder from Harry that Spotlight are the funders, not the publishers, but they will help you find and edit, find places to publish your work, and will help you in your editing. Lynn, Peggy, and Harry, thank you for putting this together. Matt, thank you so much for pulling us all into one room like this. I want to thank everybody for coming. You've got this screen here. If you want to grab a quick picture of it. And this was something that we definitely want to try to do again in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody. Take
I
care.
wanted to thank